Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ramaya Krishnan. I'm the Dean of the Heinz College, and I'm the Director of the Block Center for Technology and Society, which is hosting this event today. And I'd really like to extend a warm welcome to all of you, both those of you who are here in Hamburg Hall with me in room A301, as well as all the folks on Zoom who have tuned in to listen in on the session, the exciting sessions we're going to have for the next couple of hours. It's a pleasure to welcome you to these afternoon sessions of this conference on preparing the workforce of the future. And I want to take this time to thank you for spending Friday afternoon with us, and I think you're in for a treat. It's going to be a really enlightening discussion with thought leaders that will send you into the weekend full of insights and great ideas. So we are here today to discuss a very crucial issue, a very important societal issue, and this is about preparing the workforce of the future. As technology from machine learning and 5G and all the buzzwords you've heard of advances at an ever more rapid pace and has impacts on workers as well as on jobs and job opportunities, but it also offers new solutions for workforce training. Can't think of a better place to have the kinds of conversations that we're going to have this afternoon than here at CMU, where there are so many researchers working at this cutting edge of what's critical and important today. There are several scholars here from both around the country but across the world who are here with us today. And while I don't have the time to introduce every one of them, I think if you will hang around after our session today, there will be an opportunity to meet with them and interact with them, and I urge you to do so. And I want to thank every one of them for taking the time to be here with us and spending time with us and sharing their expertise with us. I also want to thank the conference organizers, Anna Salomons, Lee Brandstetter, Rahul Telang, Grace Klein, Katie Says. You've done an amazing job to put this together. And just a quick round of applause to say thank them for. So I'm super excited now to get to the meat of what we're going to be talking about today, and we're going to open up the conversation to a public part of the program. The earlier sessions were academic sessions earlier during the course of the day. And we'll have a presentation by Professor David Autor of MIT, who I'll introduce in just a moment, followed by a panel led by Anna Salomons of Utrecht University, who's also a visiting scholar at the Heinz College and at the Block Center. And I'm especially looking forward to the Q&A discussion afterwards. So before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the Block Center to you. This event marks actually the 3rd year anniversary of the founding of the Block Center. And it was made possible by a very generous gift by an alumnus of the Heinz College, Keith Block, and his wife, Suzanne Kelly. And the Block Center serves as a bridge between CMU faculty and students and policymakers at all levels of government, where we're able to do really policy-relevant research, provide policy guidance, and work with partners to develop new insights at scale to address the kinds of issues you're going to be hearing about today. We focus on 2 main things: responsible development of AI and how educational technologies and labor market interventions can help prepare the workforce of the future. Today we are joined by Professor David Autor, who's been one of the most influential voices on this topic over the past 2 decades. David is the Ford Professor in MIT's Department of Economics, a co-director of NBER Labor Studies Program, and co-leader of the MIT Work of the Future Task Force. David has received numerous awards. I mean, he's got I could keep going on and on. I'm going to keep this short. He's told me to keep it short as well. And he's won many awards. And one that I wanted to highlight was the 2020 Heinz Award, which is particularly apropos. It's given in honor of our own Senator John Heinz. for transforming our understanding of how globalization and technological change are impacting jobs and the earning prospects of American workers. So it's so relevant to what it is we're going to be talking about today. And David's years of scholarship have been informed by on-the-ground experience prior to his graduate school work. He spent 3 years directing computer skills education for economically disadvantaged kids and adults in San Francisco and South Africa. And a measure, if I might say, of David's impact are the words used to describe him. In 2019, he was referred by The Economist, the magazine, as the voice of the American worker. And in the same year, it shows when you're in the press, was referred to by John Oliver of Last Week of Tonight as that twerpy MIT economist. So his talk is titled The Labor Market Impacts of Technological Change from Unbridled Enthusiasm to Qualified Optimism to Vast Uncertainty. One note, please save your questions. We'll do Q&A for both David's presentation as well as the panel that Anna will run as our final segment. David, take it away.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited about the work the Block Center is doing. CMU is so relevant both in technology and in education, and then this translational work with policy is fabulously important. So I couldn't think of a better place, a group of people to speak with and to have the honor of having your attention. So I'm going to speak about changing perspectives on the role of technology in the labor market. And this, in some sense, reflects my scholarship and many others, and my evolution of thinking on this topic from the time I worked on it really at NGOs doing education, to becoming a graduate student, and then watching the evolution of technology and scholarship, and trying to understand where we are and where we come from. Hopefully this will help frame the problem for you. I think all of us are grappling with this question about what's changing, how fast, what are its consequences, and how do we predict where it's going. And so I've titled my talk From Unbridled Enthusiasm in green to Qualified Optimism in yellow to Vast Uncertainty in red, to give you a sense of changing perspectives. So let me start off by saying that citizens and experts are pessimistic about the social impacts of technology. They believe that technology is fostering inequality, and this problem is likely to grow worse in the decades ahead. So you can see this in this Pew Research poll across a number of developed countries. They asked people, adults, if you think it's likely that if robots and computers were able to do much of the work currently being done by humans, what would happen? And in the vast majority in all countries think that inequality between the rich and poor would increase, that only a minority think that the economy would become more efficient, which seems ironic, and only a tiny fraction believes that there would actually be new, better paying jobs. So that's pretty concerning that people are so worried. And in fact, academic economists are increasingly in agreement. So in 2017, the Chicago Booth School, which runs a poll of well-known economists, asked them whether robots and artificial intelligence are likely to substantially increase long-term unemployment rates. And 35 to 40% did. I think if 20 years ago that would have been about 0%. So that is concerning that people are so worried. So why? So let me present kind of 4 waves of understanding of how people thought about this problem. I'm going to call them first the education race, and you can sort of, I'll give you a buzz phrase for each. One is that technology is going to raise all boats, although some faster than others. The second is the task polarization model. I'll say some boats are rising and others are sinking. A third is a kind of the automation reinstatement race, which is that all boats could sink, but not necessarily. And the fourth is the AI uncertainty, which is, do we really even need boats? I mean, couldn't we fly? So I'm going to try to sort of frame these and talk about how they interact and hopefully what directions or insights they give us going forward. So these are all competitive models. So in non-economic speaks, it means people are taking prices as given, making their best decisions in light of the market signals they're given. And so wages are going to depend primarily on the value that workers produce their labor, i.e. their productivity at accomplishing tasks. And productivity depends on two things. One is what capabilities, what things can you do? And the second is how scarce it is. There are fewer people that are available to do a task that's important, means that task will be associated with higher wages. And then technological change interacts with the labor market by affecting scarcity. Technology can complement labor in certain tasks, making it more productive. It can substitute for labor, making it less necessary. It can directly automate tasks, meaning that tasks that were formerly done by people are now done by machines. Or it can augment or even reinstate, create special new demands for expertise and specialization. I'm going to keep coming back to that. This notion of expertise and specialization refers to some of the work that I've done with Anna Salomons and co-authors. So let me start with the basics, what we call the education race model. This actually goes back to a 1974 article by the Nobel Prize-winning economist, Dutch economist Jan Tinbergen, who kind of gave this very simple but surprisingly powerful and general analogy. He says there's kind of a race going on between the demand and the supply for skill. Technological change making society more complex, more sophisticated, more dependent upon know-how and expertise is always pushing up the demand for education or formal skills. And the job of the school system is to kind of keep pace, and they're in a kind of a race. If education must kind of keep moving out at the same rate as technology, otherwise you'll have a kind of rise in inequalities. You can sort of think of it as kind of the Red Queen of Lewis Carroll. It takes all the running you can do just to keep still. You have to go cohort by cohort to keep pace with the moving target of rising skill demand. There's no equilibrium supply, right? So this model says that we should just keep educating ourselves more and more. And by and large, we have done that, right? If you look cohort by cohort over the last 8 decades of US data and most other industrialized countries, you'll see there's been a really strong secular rise year by year in the number of years of school that people attend before they enter the paid labor force. This simple idea has been formalized and empirically verified by a number of famous papers, starting with one by Katz and Murphy, Golden and Margot, Golden and Katz. Here's a kind of a picture that shows you this idea fit to 113 years of data, trying to explore the relationship between the college wage premium and the kind of supply of skill, and then just time, the notion that the demand is moving out, secularly. And you can see actually, so the actual is the dots, the blue is what's predicted by this very simple model, and it fits the data actually remarkably well. Now, of course, this is a time series, just a correlation. You might say you can always make 2 series fit well, and that's true. However, you can test this across countries, you can test this across age groups. It is quite powerful. And so as a way of organizing a lot of information, it's a very good starting point. It explains much with little. And it also underscores an important driver of rising earnings inequality in many countries that is not the one most people talk about. When they say, why did earnings inequality rise? Most people say, well, it's technology. But actually, it's the slowdown in education supply. After the 1970s, the end of the Vietnam War, there was a big slowdown in college going, partly because people weren't going to college to avoid the draft, partly because the rate of return to education had fallen, interest rates were very high, and so as a consequence of that, people stopped going to school. And so that fits with the Tinbergian model of the education race. They slowed down, technology kept going, inequality rose. But taken too literally, it sort of explains too much. It implies that technology is a kind of an autonomous force that intrinsically and always makes educated workers more productive. Why would that be? We know there have been technologies that have been, de-skilling, right? So the movement, the early stages of the Industrial Revolution really kind of meant replacing artisanal skilled labor with less skilled labor doing repetitive tasks, right? That probably wasn't highly skill demanding. It eventually changed when that became more sophisticated. And it also implies that technology only augments. It only makes people more productive. It's kind of in sort of econo speak, it's Pareto improving. It makes some people better off and no one worse off. That doesn't fit the facts so well. So this shows you the evolution of real earnings levels by 5 education groups: high school dropout, high school grad, some college, college grad, and greater than college, for men and women from 1963 to 2018, and this is indexed to 0, so these are percentage point increases. And you can see that from kind of the 1970s to early 1980s, all these boats rose together, so to speak. And then after 1980, there's this incredible fanning out. and you see the rise in earnings of people with post-college education, with college education. And when people talk about the rise of the college premium, a lot of that rise is the fall in the real earnings of non-college workers, right? Especially non-college men. So you can say, well, maybe technology has nothing to do with that. I don't think that's likely to be the case. And certainly suggests we need more to understand what's going on, to suggest that maybe not all this is as benign as that simple augmentation story would suggest. And so that brings me, you can, by the way, I'd say you can reformulate that model to kind of deal with that fact, but not, let's see if I can do so in a kind of a more nuanced way. Why, in some sense, why would we expect technology, if this really is a technological story, to be so non-neutral? Why would it raise some people's productivity? Why would it lower other people's productivity? So the task polarization model, the next one I'm going to speak about, kind of tries to take this question on directly. And it says, why focusing on computerization in particular, does digital technology, digitization, appear to complement highly educated workers? And the sort of approach suggested here is, well, you can conceptualize the process of accomplishing a job as performing a series of tasks. They all need to be done, right? There's the inspiration, the perspiration, the brains and the brawn, the agony and the ecstasy, whatever you like. And then you can ask, which tasks will be carried out by machines and which by workers, and how does digitalization change the picture? In particular, how does it change the comparative advantage of technology relative to labor? And a kind of key observation in this way of thinking about it is what some call Polanyi's paradox. So that's Michael Polanyi, the philosopher, not Karl Polanyi, the economist. I'll put that in air quotes. And Polanyi wrote this book called The Tacit Dimension. It was actually discussed earlier today even. And the idea is that his famous phrase is, we know more than we can tell. There are many things that we know how to do that we don't know how we do them, whether that's riding a bicycle, making a persuasive argument, recognizing the face of someone who you haven't seen for 40 years, who have aged, developing a hypothesis, or even figuring out when you're cleaning a room what things are trash and what are the things that dropped on the floor, from someone's night table. And this notion of tacit knowledge helps illuminate what was easy to computerize and what was hard to computerize, at least for the first few decades of the computer revolution. So useful to break up kind of tasks into kind of three broad buckets. One is what you might call abstract or interpersonal tasks, things done by analysts, managers, doctors, designers, lawyers. And these things require kind of taking expert knowledge, situational awareness, and some creativity and flexibility in making good judgments. And here, these tasks are often strongly complemented by information technology because a key input into decision making and analysis is data and processing, right? And that if you're a doctor, if you're an attorney, if you're a marketer, if you're a researcher, if you're a designer, that technology, it doesn't substitute, doesn't make you less necessary. It increases your value added, right? It augments you. It complements the skill that you have that's scarce. Conversely, if you do routine codifiable tasks, and what I mean by that is, by routine I don't mean mundane. I mean tasks that follow a well-understood series of steps and procedures that can be described kind of algorithmically, whether you're a bookkeeper or a clerical worker or a typist or a person working in a production line carrying out repetitive tasks. Many of these tasks have increasingly been feasible to codify in software and perform cheaper and faster by machines. And it's important to recognize that many of those tasks are not the lowest skilled tasks in the economy, right? Being a bookkeeper, that was an elite occupation at the turn of the 20th century when having a high school degree was premier. And so these are jobs that use formal training and formal logic, but of course formal logic is what machines are very efficient at. Now take another form of task, what you might call service tasks, non-routine manual tasks. Food service, cleaning, security, recreation, entertainment, home healthcare. These are jobs that many of us consider low skilled. They're certainly low education. They're certainly low paid. However, they require many human traits that actually are difficult to automate. They require dexterity. They require sightedness. They require spoken language. They require common sense. They require flexibility. And many of those things require tacit knowledge, things for which we don't know the rules. And so the observation is that many of these things in the middle are much more susceptible, at least initially, in recent decades, to computerization, to automation, than the things on either side. Now, pictorially, you can sort of see that in this bar graph of the change in the share of all US employment between 1980 and 2015 in these 9 exhaustive, mutually exclusive occupations, excluding farming, I should say, ranked from lowest paid to highest paid. And you can see this looks like kind of a barbell, and actually with increasing poundage on either end of the bell, right, of the bar. So what's going on? Well, on the top, on the right, you have technical, professional, managerial workers, right? These are highly educated, highly paid workers doing abstract tasks. There's a lot of those jobs, more than there's ever been. They pay well, they're creative, they require expertise, they're augmented by automation, right? Those jobs are more interesting, more intellectually rewarding than they've been because actually you spend a lot less time doing, kind of repetitive work and more time thinking. In the middle, you see production, administrative support, office, clerical, sales. These have many routine codifiable tasks, and they have been contracting, right? It's not that we don't do as much administrative work as we used for production work, right? It's just that they're done by machines, not done by people. And then on the far left, you have a lot of these manual occupations, service occupations. So the cleaners, the home health aides, right? The fitness coaches and so on. And that's also growing. And this barbell, we think, reflects this process of the automation of routine codifiable tasks. And it's not limited to the United States. This is a paper from Rotman and Salomons that shows you a similar pattern for many EU countries between 1993 and 2010, where the red bar is the middle skill and the green and blue are the high and the low, right, this barbell. Now, you might look at that and say, okay, well, this isn't such bad news, right? High-skilled people, low-skilled people, both demand is rising, right? However, there's an important difference, and that is that the tasks that are being done here, these abstract tasks, these use scarce skills. They require high levels of schooling, training, expertise. Many of these tasks, although they're very difficult to automate, most people of sound mind and body are able to accomplish those tasks without a lot of training and to be about as productive in a month as they will be in 10 years. And that's not good because scarcity is crucial for wages. What makes something valuable is in part to be highly paid, it needs to be scarce. And so this idea that people are doing those sort of using generic skill sets in those tasks is potentially a problem. Now, so what are the wage implications of what I've just spoken about? Well, you can see that they're not going to be neutral. Not everyone's going to benefit. And you might have the intuition, well, the people in the middle are going to be most harmed because their jobs are declining in quantity. But in fact, it's a little more complicated than that because if you're in the middle, if you're doing sales or you're doing production work and you lose that job because of automation, it's not that easy to transition to become a doctor or a lawyer or a marketer, but it's much easier to transition into a job that uses a generic skill set, some type of services. And so that displacement actually tends to put downward pressure on people of lower educational levels. It pushes downward, not upward, right? So it doesn't stick in the middle, right? So here is, I'll just show you a figure that may be helpful. This is from a recent forthcoming paper by my colleague Jeroen Acemoglu and Pasquale Restrepo, recently tenure professor at Boston University, one of our students. And they look at, and I'll explain what's going on in this figure. They look at workers who in 1980, according to people of given education, race, gender, and ethnicity, were working in occupations and industries where there's been subsequently a lot of automation, and it's particularly a lot of displacement of tasks. And they say, well, imagine that's the kind of thing you would have done in an earlier era. So now you are likely to be displaced. If that's the type of activity you're connected to, there's less of that. And then look at how wages have evolved for those demographic groups. So here is the degree of task displacement. Here's the evolution of wages. So first let me say, if I stand over here, I'll switch sides. So first of all, notice most of this is above the waterline, above zero. Not everybody's losing, right? There's been a lot of productivity growth. However, people down here, right, who appear to be most exposed to task displacement have also seen wage declines on the order of -1 to 20 percentage points. And most of those that you can tell from the color are going to be built with high school or less than high school education, right? And just to give you a sense that this is not just kind of an artifact, They do the same figure for the earlier 25 years, and you do not see that phenomenon, right? This is characteristic of that time. So workers who were specialized in activities that have subsequently become automated and had their tasks taken over by automation seem to have suffered. And that is consistent with the pattern I showed you initially about the falling wages of less educated workers. So clearly, not everyone is benefiting, even if the average of this is above 0. So now let me add a third dimension to this. I've just talked to you about automation. Now let me talk to you about the converse of automation. So what about new tasks, right? In what I've told you, this kind of task model, you might just think, well, there's a fixed set of things to do, right? And the more machines do, the less people do, right? But that doesn't really feel intuitively correct, right? So if you think about it, at the turn of the 20th century, in 1901, 38% of US employment was in agriculture. Now it's under 2%. Do we do 36% less stuff than we did, 120 years ago? Probably not. Why not? Well, even as work has, collapsed in some arenas, it's evolved, or new things are happening, right? There's all kinds of, in medicine, in technology, in transportation, right? In entertainment, there's all kinds of new stuff that people are creating, right? That in themselves demand, that use labor. And I'll say more about that. But so, we need this notion of new tasks for two reasons. One, as I've just described, it's hard to believe the world is that static, right? That there's nothing new being invented. And two, if we didn't believe in that, then this model would have very dire predictions, right? It just means machines are crowding in, nothing left for people to do. So the first person to kind of formalize this was an economist named Jeffrey Lynn at the Philadelphia Fed. And he said, look, you can look through old Census Bureau volumes and you can see them kind of listing new things that are being added. And we could try to do that systematically and see what's being added to the economy. And this is an idea that Caroline Chin, who's an MIT PhD student, Anna Salomons, and Brian Segmiller, recent MIT PhD student now at the Kellogg School, we try to do this systematically over 8 decades, building on Jeff Lynn's work. And my colleague Sasamoglu and Restrepo sort of formalized this notion in a recent paper that also kind of tries to put them together. You're probably not interested in all that detail. But let me say, all right, so let me go back to new work and be concrete. I'm talking about new work. How much new work is there? Is this like a meaningful thing? So this shows you employment in 1940 in people in what work that existed in 1940. So we're going to call it old work. Might have seemed new to them, but now we realize it was old. So there are 50 million people. If we look forward in 2018 and we say, well, how many people are doing the work that people were doing in 1940, the same job titles, the same job tasks, roughly, well, that's about 60 million. But of course, the labor force now is 140 million. So where's everybody else? And the answer is new stuff, right? So we estimate that about 60% of the tasks, the jobs that people are doing in 2018 are jobs that were not present in 1940. Now, let me define what I mean by that. So what we do is we, following the example of Jeff Lynn, we use these coding volumes. So the census, if you've filled out a census form in the US, you know that one of the questions they ask you, or at least asked you in prior decades, they don't ask you anymore, is what do you do for a living? And that's not a check the box, fill in the bubble, enter a number form. That's like write in free text, right? So then there's employees, you probably never thought about this, at the Census Bureau have to figure out what you meant. And the way they do that is they look at your text and they say, oh, do I know what that is? If not, they look through these coding volumes, these handbooks that list all the titles people could have given, and then they categorize those into numbers, right? So in a given decade, there might be between 15,000 in 1910, 30,000 today of these micro titles. And they use those and then they classify them to a number. So when enough people say something that they haven't seen before, they go and ask their supervisor and say, this is a real thing. And the supervisor Googles it. I don't know what they did in 1940. And they add it to the volume. So here are some examples of new work, new titles that were added in various decades. So in 1940, the automatic welding machine operator, airplane designer, the control of remotely piloted vehicles in 1980, the artificial intelligence specialist in 2000. They're pretty on the ball, right? Cybersecurity analyst in 2018. So you might look at this and say, oh, I see. New work is people who like use new machines, fix new machines, sell new machines, steal new machines, et cetera. But in fact, this is a selected subset. Here's an equally common type of new job that's listed. And many of these are new services, right? So an acrobatic dancer, a tattooer, a mental health counselor, a conference planner, amusement park worker, a drama therapist, a sommelier. Now, for those of you who are French in the audience, I recognize that sommeliers have been around for hundreds of years since the forming of the French Republic. For all I know, the French Republic was based on sommeliers. But there weren't enough people doing it prior to 1990 in the US for it to register, right? And what are these things? Well, many of them are basically changing services that reflect changing incomes, changing wealth, and changing demographics, right? What's the opposite of aging? The getting youngerness of the US population, right, during the baby boom, and then the aging of the population recently. First rights, all kinds of child care, now all kinds of elder care and health services, right? And so all of them are new work by this definition, or at least by this empirical definition. I'll say something substantively on that in a minute. But you may be wondering, like, how much truthiness is there in this figure, right? Does this correspond to anything? So, in honor of CMU, we ran this through Google Ngrams and tried to figure out whether these appearances of these words in the census volumes corresponds to their uses in published English language texts scanned by Google. So this gives you the frequency of occurrence of new titles relative to existing titles in their usage in published English language in each decade. And you can see, roughly, that the Census Bureau captures them as they peak, right? It's not like ahead of the curve. It's capturing them as they become commonplace, right? So not the first sommelier, but when enough people know what they are, that's when they capture. So we think it's actually picking something up. But now you might say, okay, but substantively, what does new work actually mean, right? All these jobs, right? You're breathing in carbon dioxide. No, excuse me, you're breathing in oxygen, exhaling carbon dioxide. Well, nowadays you're doing a bit of both. So what actually makes them distinct? So the way we think about it is new work is work that is specialized, that requires scarce expertise or knowledge, right? So these examples I gave you, an automatic welding machine operator, a mental health counselor, a tattooer, sommelier, a pageant director, they all require some expertise that not everybody has, right? And it doesn't have to be rarefied, right? So some titles that have recently been added would be like a solar plumber or a solar electrician. Well, what's a solar plumber electrician? It's a plumber electrician who has spent time on solar installations, right? And now they have a more specialized skill set. So if you're going to do a solar installation, who are you going to call? Probably a solar plumber, right? And this notion of expertise is critical, right? Because jobs that use generic skills are poorly paid even when they're very socially valuable, right? So waiters, checkout clerks, housekeepers, security guards, daycare teachers, home health aides, crossing guards, these are life and death occupations, the last three. They're very poorly paid. Why? Because the supply of people who can do them is highly, highly abundant. And if you raise the wage a little bit, a lot more people are willing to do them, except when the economy is, when the unemployment rate is so low. So specialization is key to our concept of new work. It's work that requires some novel skill set, some additional knowledge. Now, that may be fleeting, right? It may not last forever, but in that time, it's valuable. And that's why people are reporting it as their job, because they're being paid for that thing. So now let me take you back to technology. How does this relate to automation? Well, in our work, we try to distinguish between two broad categories of technologies. One are things that automate, that take the tasks that people already do and hand them over from labor to capital, right? So we look for technologies that actually substitute for the tasks that people do at their jobs. Conversely, we look for augmentation innovations. These are things that increase the value, the variety, the productivity of the tasks that people do. The way we do this is, I won't spend much time on here, unfortunately, but we use natural language processing of patents. And on the one hand, we look for patents that claim to carry out the tasks that workers do. And on the other hand, we look for patents that mention the detailed occupations that people work in. And we think of those as much more likely to be reflecting things that make those people more productive. And just to show you what this looks like graphically at a very simple level, this shows you the relationship. This is between, I'm going to show you over two 40-year periods. This is between 1940 and 1980. Each one of these dots corresponds to an occupation broadly. This is its employment change over those 4 decades, or its relative employment change. And this is exposure to augmentation patents, patents that increase the value of expertise Holding constant automation, those occupations seem to be growing, right? So where that technology is going into place, we don't see contraction, we see expansion. Conversely, those occupations exposed to automation are contracting, holding augmentation constant. That's true for 1940 to 1980. It's also true for the next 4 decades, from 1980 to 2018. So as you can sort of think of that as potentially kind of an out-of-sample exercise. Now let me say, many occupations are exposed to both. They often happen in the same place, right? So, in office automation, right? Office automation eliminated a lot of routine clerical jobs. It also created all kinds of office technology specialists, right? So it's not either or. But one thing you might notice, and I think this is informative, is that if you look at the slope of augmentation between the new innovations and the growth of employment, it's kind of pretty much the same, maybe a little bit shallower in the more recent 4 decades. If you look at the automation locus, right, it gets a lot steeper. So it may in fact be the case that we're seeing more of this automation going on, right? We're not sufficiently confident to say that's an absolute difference, but we suspect it is. Okay, I should also finally say it's not all about technology, right? Just plain old changes in investment and demand change where new work is created, right? If you start, so for example, here's a negative example. When the China trade shock had a big cause a huge inward contraction in U.S. manufacturing employment, we didn't just see the number of workers decline. We saw the amount of new work decline, right? There was less specialization, less demand for expertise. Conversely, wherever you invest, like again, take the example of energy infrastructure investment, all types of new jobs will be associated with that. Not just more work, but more specialized work. People doing novel things that command a premium because they complement some expertise that not many people have so far. Okay, that leaves us with some questions. Has automation accelerated relative to augmentation, and why? Can we improve incentives to augment workers to generate new demands for specialization? In particular, how do we restore expert work for non-college workers, which I think is the biggest labor market problem that we have? And then finally, does AI render all these questions moot? So now let me turn to that question. So I'm going to call this the era of artificial intelligence uncertainty. So when it comes to AI, does the task framework still fit, or should it just quit? Well, the task framework, as I've spelled out, has kind of 2 conceptual pieces, right? One is the notion of tasks as units of work to be accomplished by workers and machines. I think this still fits. Others might disagree. Looking at you, Avi. The other is a theory of which tasks can be readily accomplished by computers. And that was based on Polanyi's paradox. AI clearly blows this constraint out of the water, right? We don't need to be able to specify the rules and steps and procedures to do something anymore for a machine to do it, right? We can just give it, here's the outputs, here's the inputs, you figure out how those things go together and just replicate it, right? Artificial intelligence is kind of statistical inference machine learning. So this is gone. We're left with perhaps this, right? This notion of, well, what can we describe? And that has costs and benefits. So we can still predict, based on our current understanding of what AI does, we can say who's going to use it, which industries, which occupations, and so on. And we do that in a recent paper, but let me skip that. The harder question is, we can say what AI does right now, but we can't really say what it can't do, what it won't be able to do. And that's the era of AI uncertainty, right? That the roadmap we have of automation through digital technology is the process of codifying a series of steps, turning them into software, and setting a machine loose on it. That's gone, right? So the question is, what will machines do, and where is human comparative advantage in that mix? So there are a lot of things we can say it will do. I think, some will disagree, probably people more expert than me, that AI will dramatically speed the progress of dexterous adaptive robots, right? Many manual tasks that require dexterity, adaptability, contextual interactions, common sense, will become more routine for machines. Not immediately, but it's happening. AI will perform many what we would formerly call expert managerial and professional decision-making tasks, right? They'll become equivalent to routine tasks. It's already underway in finance, in investing, in inventory, credit, fraud detection, design, right? Machines can do many of these decision-making tasks. They don't follow well-understood rules and procedures. They require a mix of hard and soft thinking, of instinct, of disparate data sources, and then reaching a conclusion. Now you might say, well, machines can't do that well. They don't understand what they're doing. But then people also can't do it very well and they don't understand what they're doing, right? So the problem is we're not that good at it either. So it's not that hard to be surpassed, right, by a piece of technology. So I think the argument that AI is context blind and cannot reason holistically used to be very compelling, and is much less and less compelling as just through demonstration of what is feasible. However, so that says, where does human comparative advantage lie? Human capacities are still underrated, right? If you could buy the dip on human capacities, is the moment to do so. People effortlessly do extraordinary things, right? They apply common sense to tease apart otherwise intractable problems. They apply abductive reasoning to basically develop a hypothesis with a small set of observations and try to organize it. They draw inferences from small data, right? Which is a lot harder than big data, because big data, there's a lot of it. Small data, you have only a few examples, a few data points to connect. We don't fully appreciate how much tacit knowledge we actually possess. I feel confident that people have comparative advantage in creativity, in judgment, hypothesis formation, in contextual thinking, causal analysis, communication, emotional intelligence. Many things are very important. But it's important that those are expert tasks, right? There's no question that there's no sense in which we're running out of jobs, right? That's clear. But we may not have as many good jobs, right? The problem we face is not the quantity, but the quality. And that's because jobs that are generic, which are many of the things that are hard to do with machines right now, not very good jobs for people because they're generic. Okay, let me go back to Polanyi for 1 sec before I come to a rousing conclusion. Artificial intelligence is opaque to humans, right? It's layers of learned statistical association encoded in nodes. There's no human interpretable window into that decision-making process. Now, of course, there's interpretable AI. People are working on this. But the fact that they're working on it shows you just how hard it is. So this brings us to an irony. Prior to AI, we had Polanyi's paradox, which is that we struggle to imbue computers with tacit knowledge needed for performing non-routine tasks. We know more than we can tell. Now we have Polanyi's revenge, which is that computers know more than they can tell us, right? They can acquire tacit knowledge and solve problems, and we don't understand how they're doing it. And that actually, in some sense, is a challenge to successful interaction between people and machines. We want machines to augment people. If they are opaque to us, that makes it actually harder for that process, that virtuous process to unfold. Okay, so let me conclude by just talking about some policies and possibilities. So I worked on a book as part of the MIT Task Force on the Work of the Future with my colleagues David Mindell and Liz Reynolds, and we sort of talked about some major policy planks, which I think are inadequate, so let me mention them to you. So one is to educate and train the workforce to meet the demands of the moment. So of course, right, no one could disagree, and it's true. It's not wrong just because it's boring. But it's not at all adequate, right? So for example, there's a well-known figure that kind of what people call the Great Divergence, right? Productivity growth in the United States is effectively about 80% higher in 1978 than it was in 2018 than it was in 1978. Over 40 years, average output per hour of worker. But the wage of the median worker has barely risen, right? Not the average, but the median, right? The typical person has seen very little of this increase. And now, when we bring back to education, the median worker is much more educated than they were 40 years ago, right? In 1978, the median worker, 65% of the median workers had a high school degree and no higher. Now it's only 35%, and that means the other 30% have moved up, have some college or greater than college, and yet their wages have barely moved. So clearly just increasing supply, to some extent, is a bit of pushing on a rope. It's just not going to get you that far. The second is to rebuild public and private institutions that shape job quality. The US leads the world in not doing anything to improve working standards over multiple generations. This needs to be done too aggressively can obviously backfire. A third is, and I think this is the one I believe most importantly, is to shape innovation to complement the skills of workers, to change not just people, but the technology itself. So let me give you a quotation, a little bit depressing, but I think for you're useful. Shoshana Zuboff, in her book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, coins this phrase, inevitabilism. Inevitabilism is technological inevitability. It's the mantra on which we are trained, that it's an existential narcotic prescribed to induce resignation. It's inevitable. Whatever happens, it must happen. We just must accept it because, of course, the technology dictates it should be such. We should reject that idea. We shape the future through our choices about what technologies, what values, where do we invest our effort, right? So China is shaping the future through the Great Firewall of China. That is an incredible technological feat. The notion of filtering almost all the content produced by over a billion people in real time, picking up which pictures, and changing them, that is remarkable. Or surveillance, right? China has one version of surveillance, the surveillance communism. The US has another, surveillance capitalism, which Shoshana Zuboff's book's about. Those are not characteristics of AI. Those are choices of wealthy actors on where to invest, right? The machine didn't do that. There was nothing in AI that made that happen. That was a choice about how people wanted to shape the future. But of course, you can shape it in other directions. You could use that same technology to assist with elder care, to create telepresent robotics, mobile medicine. So not by surprise, right? This is a assistive care robot in Japan, which leads the world in aging, and does picking up of patients, which of course one of the most difficult and dangerous parts of being a care worker. You could use it to provide real-time information for workers doing construction, diagnosis, maintenance, repair. You could enable immersive learning through augmented and virtual reality, a lot of what we were talking about today, using technology to make us more effective as learners. So it's a choice, right? It's not intrinsic. So let me lead you with one uncertainty, one certainty, and one admonition. So the uncertainty is we have vastly, not we, technologists have vastly extended the frontier of possibilities. Our uncertainty about these boundaries is much larger than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was confident that I knew the direction of where automation was heading. Now I do not. And anyone who tells you that they do with certainty is a person you should ignore, right? There's just a lot of uncertainty out there. The certainty is that these technologies will expand the set of desirable possibilities that are within reach. They will help us, could help us tackle global warming, poverty, electrification, right? All the expensive and very challenging transitions we need to make. But we could easily blow it. No guarantee. The admonition is that when we talk about the future, people are saying they think of the future as an act of looking into the crystal ball and seeing what's going to happen. But of course, that kind of reverses cause and effect, right? The future is an act of creation. It's something that we are making choices about, where we want to prioritize, what we want this incredibly fluid plastic technology to do for us. So the question we should ask is not what AI will accomplish, but what we want it to accomplish. And so I hope that, I find that a motivating thought in this period of uncertainty. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion in the panel.
Great. Welcome, everyone, to this panel on the labor market effects of artificial intelligence, or AI for short. So I think David has just set us up perfectly for this conversation. We've heard that AI is not business as usual. And many are expecting its widespread adoption to have quite transformative effects on our labor market. So the objective of this panel is quite simply to explore that with these experts that we have here. So we have an amazing set of human intelligence here that we are going to probe on these questions. I could easily fill the hour talking about their collective achievements. Not going to do that. I'm just going to briefly introduce them all. Let me start. You've been introduced to David Autor. Let me next introduce Sameena Shah, who is the managing director of AI research at JP Morgan. Sameena holds a PhD in AI, so she's not only inventing new AI technologies, but also has, in her very successful career, garnered a ton of information and experience in actually implementing these technologies in business settings. Then next we have Majd Sakr, who is a professor at the School of Computer Science here at CMU, also affiliated with the Black Center. Majd is at the frontier of developing very exciting education technologies. So one of his flagship projects is called SAIL, where he actually develops AI-augmented education that's being implemented in US community colleges. And then last but least of all least, we have Avi Goldfarb, who is the Rotman Chair holder of AI in Healthcare at the University of Toronto, also the chief data scientist at the Creative Destruction Lab. And Avi has published very wide-ranging influential research on both the opportunities and also the challenges of digital economies and digital technologies with a special focus on AI. So perfect for this panel, I would say. So welcome, panelists. I'm excited to get started. I hope you guys have a ton of questions for them. Before we get to that, let's just sort of set the stage a little bit and get a bit of a sense of their perspectives and fix some ideas on this important topic. And let me start with you, Avi. So, you've written a best-selling book with co-authors where you think of AI as what you term prediction machines. And I heard a sequel is in the works too for this book that's going to be coming out. So any spoilers are welcome. And can you just tell us a little bit about sort of why do you think of AI as prediction machines? And how does that sort of concept help us think about what is actually the labor market implications of these technologies?
Sure. So we've been, there's been a lot of hype and excitement over the last 10 years about AI. And the reason we have a panel about AI today and we didn't have so many 20 years ago has very little to do with an artificial general intelligence that you think about from science fiction. It's a very particular technology or a set of technologies around machine learning, around data science that have gotten much, much better. Machine learning, I imagine this crowd, it's no surprise, that's computational stats. And so we can think about it as prediction technology. Prediction technology has gotten much, much, much better. And that's not to say that this isn't a big deal. Prediction technology is transformative. Prediction matters because it helps us make better decisions. And decisions are a key part of all sorts of jobs. And so when we think about the implications, we think about both automation and augmentation. In the context of today's AI, we should start with decisions at the center and thinking through how prediction can make better decisions, potentially by automation or augmentation. Should I keep going?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's book one. That's prediction machines. Okay, so next month we have a new book coming out. I got 5 minutes. I was just trying to get a feel for the vibe. Okay, called Power and Prediction. And the essence of, we wrote this prediction machines book 5 years ago thinking a revolution was about to happen. And then when we look at what's happened, we haven't seen that impact of prediction technology that we expected. And so what's happened has been very much what David just talked about, which is you see tasks, you unpack a workflow, you identify some tasks within that workflow that are human, and you say, hey, let's put an AI there, take out the human, and make things a little bit faster, a little bit more productive. And it has, we've seen some human replacement in certain jobs, and it's been kind of incremental, at least in our view. So one version is that's where we're going to land. I don't think that's where we're going to land, but taking David's point on uncertainty to heart, I think there is potential for rethinking how certain systems operate. And the example I want to use is the taxi industry. Okay, so taxi industry operated largely the same way for decades. Okay, there was a dispatcher whose job was to tell taxis where to go, and there were taxi drivers who were trained in knowing how to get from point A to point B. Then two technologies came along a little over 10 years ago. One was automatic directions. You can think about that as prediction technology. And the other is automatic dispatch. Okay? We worked with a startup about 10 years ago, a little company called Winston, that said, hey, we can combine those technologies and make taxi companies way, way more efficient. And they sold it to taxi companies, and they did okay, and it made a little difference to those taxi companies. But then some other companies came along and realized, no, what we can do with automatic dispatch and directions is empower anybody who knows how to drive to become a taxi driver effectively. And that transformed an industry. That is what we think about as a system level change. And when I look at the various changes that we've seen from machine learning, there's not enough of those system level changes. And there's too many people figuring out how to do automatic dispatch and selling it into taxi companies.
Great, great. So yeah, that was very clear. So you have the sort of concept of these prediction machines, but the actual way that they're currently being implemented, you think is maybe a little too narrow, this sort of incremental task level, human does A, let's have the machine take that over. But there are some examples of this system-wide change that you actually would like to see more of because you think it would be more beneficial in the end as well for productivity in the labor market. So can I ask you, Sameena, so you have a lot of experience with these systems already as they're now being implemented as well. Do you agree with Avi's view of like this sort of prediction as sort of being at the core of what these technologies do? And do you also have some examples, can be war stories of like actual implementation that you've overseen or that you've seen in the business world of these technologies?
So I think with regard to that specific one, I would have to like dig into the definition of prediction. If it's like broad reaching and we are saying like all kinds of inferencing, extraction tasks, all of them are prediction of some kind, then yes, maybe.
It's the process of filling in missing information as we define it. Okay. Since you asked.
So, okay. We can take it offline.
Take it outside.
But I think what I would definitely agree with is that there are a lot of point processes, and AI has done quite well in increasing the speed, lowering the cost, efficiency, scalability. Something you could process now 10 times, and the volumes have gone up. And so sometimes it doesn't exactly look like replacement of humans because they were going to be future humans, which never appeared. So they don't necessarily get counted. But I think AI has, from a practical sense, in the non-sexy use cases, everyday use cases, is quite pervasive in industries, and we just don't notice it as much. With regards to, I think this, what I used to call like step function change, but I like system level change more now, so I'm going to start calling it system level change
Excellent.
now. Is rarer for sure. And so I'll give a couple of examples from my experience. So one of the things, for example, that JP Morgan was interested in was growing into new segments that the traditionally investment bankers were not serving. And these could be the new startups, right? So who's serving them? Nobody's really serving them. They kind of have to figure out many things out for themselves. So it was like, but the investment banking cost model, business model, not necessarily the startups have that much money to support, but how do you support it? So then we came up with a completely digital solution, which is powered completely by AI and other technological innovation to come up with a system which we call Capital Connect, which is going to serve that market. So it's a new digital business, new growth, which never existed before. So it's new kind of specialist jobs didn't exist. So that is one type of area. And the second, I think I want to separate what I would call like transformation. So things that already existed, but now we are either replacing or augmenting humans. And within that, there's point solutions versus system level change becomes even more important. So in that, one of the things in which we have been quite successful is this client onboarding aspect. In which, again, it was this idea of how do you look at it end to end, as opposed to I'm going to put one AI here, one AI there, one AI here, but what is the purpose of this activity? And when you start thinking about this activity, like getting from point A to point B is the task, as opposed to like who is doing it now, what is the exact path that humans have adopted or settled on, and then thinking about reimagining that process. You circumvent that old legacy pathway, and then you come up with something which is much more efficient. It is a system level change that you can be quite proud of. And in that, one of the things which I also find is many times, and I was very happy to hear about this tacit knowledge, because that is my everyday life. Like, how do you actually like do this? And then when you ask humans, it's very much an iterative process. You show some output, and then, oh, actually, it was this thing too, I forgot to mention. And then that's why like this rapid iteration to remove uncertainty is very critical. And I think people often underestimate the importance of these rapid iterations in the AI world. We use it in agile or whatever in technology, not as much in AI, but I think in AI it should be even more frequent and more iterative to remove uncertainty. But I think the good part of that is that once you have standardized your processes, you have codified that knowledge. I mean, in Kahneman's like noise book talks about the same thing. The variance that humans introduce is so much more than what now your standardized process gets you. And I think sometimes we also think about anecdotally like human performance versus AI performance, but we imagine somehow that human will be performing at 200% efficiency, 200% accuracy, whatever. But in reality, we're like, so the average performance you get from humans, from a realistic perspective, versus what AI will do day in and day out, AI could be much better.
Great. Yeah, I think we're sort of touching on the point here where whether we're talking about are we optimistic about AI or are we just pessimistic about humanity, right? It's all relative. So I think this is a deep point that I've heard before. I concur. And on that note, let me turn to you, Majd, because you were sort of trying to push out the frontier in a very exciting direction, education, right? And surely because you're spending your career on this, you have some belief about what this could be in the future, and maybe it isn't everything that you want it to be yet now. But could you tell us a bit about sort of what you're concretely implementing now and what your sort of hope is for what you can achieve for education? And then maybe also sort of talk a little bit about the roadblocks that you think are sort of going to be very important in trying to get to some desirable outcome.
In 5 minutes.
In 5 minutes, yeah. Go for it.
To build upon what David told us, the September report in technology jobs has shown that there are 8.9 million technology jobs in the US. And it's a significant increase month after month. It's been ongoing for many months. And out of these, to motivate our work, out of these, about 600 to 800,000 of these jobs are in emerging technology areas. And it depends how you label the emerging technologies, right? So, and the demand for people in these, with these skill sets is growing. And so examples of these are data science, cybersecurity, cloud computing, AI, machine learning, right? What many of our students are learning. And so the number of people that we're graduating, or the number of people that we can graduate, is not going to meet the demands of industry. And hence, we need to do something. We need to grow the workforce in these domains. Otherwise, it's going to risk our ability to remain competitive globally. So we have to solve that problem. And so we have to train people, and we need to identify people that can be trained. So there's on-the-job training. There's potential upskilling of individuals. But we also need to look for other opportunities. And one opportunity is the set of community colleges across the nation. There are 1,043 community colleges in the United States. They train about 10 plus million people. And they have become very flexible in how they train people. So they've had to reinvent themselves so that they can offer the practicality that the job market needs, and so that they can continue to attract learners. But those individuals are not well-funded necessarily, and they're overtaxed. And so what we are trying to do is to develop a platform and a curricula, and as well as a research test bed, so that we can offer training at these different contexts and study effectiveness using AI, using a lot of different techniques that we do, so that we can go ahead and train a large workforce. And the way we do it is we adopt the method of iterative learning. So we put people in a real-world scenario using real-world data sets and real-world tasks, and we ask them to complete these tasks within a budget to meet certain requirements. And what we do is we allow them the scaffolding needed so that they can start to carry out these tasks. And then when they start to carry out the tasks, we use automation to provide them feedback. And this is contextualized, actionable feedback so that they continue to do the exploration and experimentation that you were referring to. And through that process, that's when human beings are learning. Especially when we're speaking to adult learners. We need to train them in a way that relates what they are doing right now to what they might be doing in the job. And a lot of the training that we do is job-centric. So an example job is a data engineer, or a cloud administrator, or a cloud DevOps engineer, or something like that. So we help train people so that they can get the position or get the interview and hopefully get the position by training them using this project-based method through this iterative exploration and experimentation.
Right. Great. And what do you, so in the future, so you're already doing this, right? And you're just planning to scale that up further, or do you see like further like immersive sort of AI classrooms, or that you hoping to develop, or is this sort of your first?
Yes, we are planning to scale. We do work with a dozen or so colleges across the nation. That's going to grow by a factor of 3 in 2023. We also do training with the US Army, and we have been approached by the US Navy and the CIA for similar type training. This knowledge is needed across the board. Everybody needs to develop these skill sets. So, so yes, we need to scale this, and the question is, where does AI start to play a role, given the theme of this panel? And so there's a lot that we still need to understand about the behavior of learners when we are thinking about a scope that's a bit more sophisticated. When we're speaking about mathematics, I think we can probably apply certain AI-enabled tools so that we can, but when we're speaking about more sophisticated tasks, that's when things become a lot more difficult. And so what we are trying to do is to augment the instructor with the necessary information so that they can be more effective at teaching those sophisticated skills. And so this is where we see things improving in these emerging technology domains. There's something important that we should talk about, which is the word emerging. They continue to evolve. And they evolve at a much more rapid pace than other types of jobs that are pretty stable. And so hence our training has to evolve. And the people offering the training also has to evolve. They also have to evolve accordingly. So it makes it challenging. That's where offering a platform across the entire nation tends to solve this problem and have a big impact.
Great. Well, let me then last turn to you, David, before we open the floor. What's your sort of perspective on, so we've heard about different applications, we've heard about the systems change, we've heard about particular education sort of promise for these applications. Do you see any other sort of major, let's say from an optimistic perspective, eras where you think AI could really benefit?
Sure. Well, let me try to reflect on all those things.
Sure.
These things I think really should tie together. So starting with what Majd said, I mean, first of all, I'm extremely optimistic about the potential here. I mean, I think that education is an area where we've had very little productivity growth over very long periods of time, and that makes it more and more expensive, right? And so the U.S. we have great higher education systems. They're unaffordably expensive. They create all kinds of debt. They're highly risky at this point for people who don't have super high probability of succeeding. They're going to come out with a lot of debt for sure, even without a lot of education. So anything that could make education, more accessible, more efficient, less expensive, and more immersive, right? And I think that is, and especially when we think about adult learners, right? When we're talking about a lot of these emerging occupations, we're talking about new opportunities that we want people to capitalize on. People often, they're stuck in an old skill set. It's depreciating in value. We want to do something new. Adults don't want to go back to school. They do not want to sit in this room for 8 hours a day, right, and listen to me. So what do we need? We need adults learn well in situ, right? They learn well working with tools, working with real environments. I think the potential for AI and virtual reality, it's just enormous. So I think what you're doing is great, and I'm really heartened to hear about it. And I feel like this is one of those one of those emerging opportunities. And so let me actually, connect to what Sameena and Avi were saying about this sort of the step change or the transformative process, right? And I fully agree with that point. And this is, that if you simply think of machines as automating existing tasks, right, and that's all you're going to do, that's not going to get you very far. Someone gave you a funny example recently. Imagine if the Egyptians had invented robots and they said, okay, well, let's see, we can weave some baskets out of rushes, and it could build some pyramids and then bury the dead and and then we're done, right? That's all. There's nothing new to do with that, right? That's not where the advancement comes from. The advancement comes from you have new technology enable new ways of doing work, and often our imagination lags dramatically the actual capabilities, right? So a famous example given, electrification in American manufacturing, right? The first acts of electrification where you basically would take out the steam engine or the water wheel drive and you put a big electric motor, outside the factory that just turns a central spindle. Well, that wasn't where the efficiency gains came from. That just allowed you to do things a little better. The efficiency gains came from realizing you could move the power to each of the work sites through wires and use much more precise tools in better lighting to do much more complex operations. That took a long time to figure out. So it's always the first instinct is to do the thing we're doing faster, right? To, back to the, just do the thing we're doing faster, right? And in fact, I would say, and I'm not the first person to make this criticism, the model of AI that many researchers have in mind is let's replicate human capabilities. And maybe we should ask, that's all you got, right? Why do that, right? We already have human capabilities. Can't you do something better than that? right? And so I think that, that's where the potential is, right? And those step changes. So I think there's enormous scope, but it's nice to think that we're going to bring people along, right, as these new opportunities emerge, that we're going to help people become valuable. And I firmly believe new scarce skills will be in demand. The challenge is the transition, and anything that it speeds people's adaptation and access to that is highly desirable.
Great, thank you for that synthesis. So I have a ton of follow-ups also from the online audience, but I thought let's take some questions from our live audience, and I'll try to bundle them and pose them to our, so a microphone will come to you so our online audience can hear you as well. Let's start here, and then you have another question here.
Sure, thank you. So I have a very technical question. Your kid has just graduated high school and comes to you and says, I want to be a truck driver. What do you tell them?
Clear question, and excellent. All right.
It's actually a good time to be a truck driver. Oh, sorry.
It is, it is. Thanks, all right. Okay, I was another question here. Two more.
Thanks. So my name is Lin Fei Wu. I study the dynamics and impacts of innovation in science technology in School of Computing and Information at University of Pittsburgh. So my question for Professor Autor is, for most of the economic literature I know, they seem to treat the progress of science itself as something exogenous. And my question with relate to that literature landscape is, do you find any theory about how science and technology progress itself particularly inspiring to your work? And if not so far, what kind of theory we need in that direction? Thank you.
You have another question? Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. So I'm a PPM student here at Heinz Public Policy. So my question is to the panel and specifically to Professor Autor. You mentioned China shock earlier in your presentation, and then in one of my classes this year, I was exposed to the invisible China problem, wherein there is a gap between the rural and urban China. And so how do you think now after the pandemic, companies are moving out of China slowly? And so how do you think it would affect the new AI world, and how China is gonna, will China be able to sustain its China shock to the world with AI and invisible China and all that? So.
You have another question there in the back? All right.
So India is supposed to overtake China in 2023 as the most populous country in the world. It's adding 1 million people to the workforce every month. 1 million people. How do you tackle a problem like that?
I'm sorry, that last part.
So I said, how would you use the same statistics that you've done out here? How would you help, or what are the, how would you fix the problem what's the solution for something like that?
Solution for population growth or for?
No, not population growth. The workforce that's coming into the economy every month.
Got it.
Thank you.
We have
a question.
Here, go ahead, yeah. And then we'll take one more here, and then we'll try to wrap.
All right.
We might take another round. Yeah.
One question for all the panelists is, how is this transition affecting political attitude and questions of fairness? And so how is the interaction of technology and politics evolving, and how much should we be concerned about unexpected or uncertainty in that direction as well?
Hi, my name is Isabella Wu, and I'm also a public policy student here at Heinz College. So my question is for Professor Sakr. I wonder, what kind of subjects that you would particularly recommend those community colleges to have in order to enforce the workforce here in the U.S., and also how to possibly stimulate the private sector also to give those experienced workers with necessary technology training for them. Yeah, so these are my 2 questions. Thank you.
All right. Okay, great. Thanks for those questions. Let me just first try to direct them a bit, and then we'll see if you have time for more. And I'll also try to bundle them a bit with some of the questions that were submitted online. So just to start with the sort of skill question, there was also online a question sort of what should we think of as the most in-demand competencies? What should we be telling our kids to do or not to do, like if they want to be a truck driver or something else? Well, let me start with you, Avi. So what's your view on this?
So right now, it's not a bad time to be a truck driver as long as they know that 10 years from now, it might be a bad time to be a truck driver. And so I think my daughter's about to graduate high school. If she said, okay, I want to be a truck driver, I'm like, okay, that's for your next 10 years. But start thinking about what you're going to be doing when you're 30. And it's going to be something very different, or it might be something very different. So just the lesson of the jobs and the skills required in the workforce change over time is and at a faster rate than, say, 30 years ago, whether it's AI related or something else, is a useful lesson. I don't think you should necessarily say, like, self-driving trucks aren't on the road tomorrow. So.
Right. And you're saying people should be able to adjust. Like that's a more important characteristic than like the sort of target occupation that you have. Should be able to adjust to the changes, as you, Majd, were also saying. And Sameena, from your business perspective, what do you see as a sort of a...
First of all, as an Indian mom, I would say why. And I would say go. Read something else or get it out of your system and
Great advice.
Let's come to the business question now.
That's great advice. That's great advice. Okay, let me then, so there were some questions specifically to you, David, that are sort of, I would say the sort of broad umbrella is sort of adjustment to bigger shocks, whether it's the China shock or a sort of a growth in the workforce that is coming from developing countries, which is of course related to the China shock. So how do you think about those sort of adjustments?
Sure. Okay, so the first question was about innovation as an economic process.
Sure,
right?
I'm going to talk about that separately.
Oh, okay,
I think
so
that's a bigger question.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
Yeah.
So I have this, sort of independently of this, I've done some work on China's economic rise and the impact it's had on competition in manufacturing around the world, and particularly in the U.S. And it's first important to stipulate it's had consequences in the U.S. and they've been substantial. But China's rise is historically the best thing that's happened to the world's middle class ever, right? And not only did it bring 500 million Chinese out of abject poverty, but it created prosperity in Central and South America, investment in sub-Saharan Africa, right? So the pain that the U.S. experiences is epsilon relative to the gains to humanity. So of course it's easy to see it from a parochial perspective, but that's always the place we should start. I think China it will continue to grow and advance for sure. It faces many of its own internal challenges that would be the case having to do with governance, but also having to do with changing demographics, also having to do with Chinese productivity growth slowed considerably around 2010, and the investment model has changed. So I think it's people say anything that can't go on forever won't, right? And this is it's a mistake or not that you're making this, to project from the last 20 years to the next, right? So I think China is a normal country and it will face challenges, and I think the main challenges in our interactions with China at this point are much more geopolitical than conflicts around manufacturing jobs per se. On the million workers a day, I mean, that's not intrinsically problematic. In general, everyone who's a worker is also a consumer, right? So in general, when more people come into the workforce, they also buy more stuff and they create work for one another. It's not intrinsically problematic, but of course, in the labor market, not all labor markets in India work as well as we would like them to. There's a lot of poverty, a lot of malnutrition, and a lot of underemployment. And so the question is whether India's incredible progress similarly can be more broadly dispersed. And some of that will occur through education, right? And India actually has a incredibly proud legacy of education and continues to produce some of the most impressive people intellectually and scientifically in the world. And the question is whether that can be made more broadly accessible, and that is a huge challenge. But then again, the progress has been remarkable.
It's because of these things. you don't become a truck driver.
It's all because of the reduction in truck driving.
All the Indian
Indian
moms.
That's right, the Indian moms. Sorry, not the truck driving. The moms.
Great.
Good.
Well, let me then turn to this question that I think is a very first order one about like where does technology actually come from? And it's true that a lot of the sort of economist models think of this as like coming manna from heaven, it's exogenous, it's given, right? Which may be true in the short run, but in the long run, certainly not. And actually, we just heard from basically all our panelists that they sort of envision a view of technology, you know, that would be more beneficial if it were more structural change, if it were more transformational, if it were less focused on automating like little segments of already existing things, if it had more imagination in that sense. So I guess the big question is how do we make that come about, right? And then this is, I'm sure you all should weigh in on, and no one will have a definitive answer, but I think it sort of goes into thinking like, how do people actually decide, you know, where to innovate and what incentives are innovators facing? And perhaps as a government, but maybe also at the level of businesses who are the end users of these innovations, how can we influence that direction in a more desirable societal direction? So this is a big question. So let me just go down the line and start there, and I'll end with David, but start with you, Majd.
Well, for us, innovation is where it's needed the most right now, especially in training a large workforce in the domain. And areas where we see a lot of need is keeping people engaged and making sure that we are measuring learning effectiveness and we are impacting learning effectiveness. Areas where we need to rely on these emerging technologies when we're training individuals is how can we make sure that they are making progress in the way they would like to learn and they would like to add skills to their current set of skills. And so thinking about when a human being is carrying out an action and they're starting out, what kind of feedback should you give them versus when it's the 10th time they are carrying out that action? And if the feedback is the same, they're going to feel very frustrated and the technology is not really helping them. And so recognizing that the learner is also evolving in what they are doing and they're exploring and experimenting, and now your feedback to them needs to also evolve and recognize that they've done some things or they're wheel spinning on some things. And so you need to take that context into account.
So you're saying collect actual direct user experiences with these technologies as a way to improve?
Absolutely. And we also have to understand the context of the learner. To indirectly answer one of the questions, a large number of the learners at community colleges, 60% of them are female. And the demographics at community colleges match that of the nation a lot better than four-year colleges and universities. And so, unfortunately, in STEM domains, we lose these individuals much faster than majority learners. And hence, now we need to think about, well, why are we losing them? And what do we need to identify as potential issues? So things that have been identified are self-efficacy, the identity, do you see yourself as a professional in this domain, and the sense of belonging. And so how do you measure these things? And then more importantly, then how can we use technology to improve these things so that the learners continue to iteratively learn, and when things become difficult, they don't say, I don't see anyone like me here, why am I doing this to myself, I'm out. What we need to do is we need to use technology in a way where we can understand where they are on these dimensions and then leverage technology so that we can influence them and motivate them so that they can remain engaged and overcome these challenges as they encounter them.
Great, okay. And Sameena, so same question from your business perspective, what's the sort of effective way to think about getting towards these more beneficial implementations of AI technologies or other technologies for that matter?
It's a great question. I think the first step is that realizing that we want or accepting that we want a step function change or system level change in a certain business area. For some areas, business might not be ready. They are maybe interested only in faster speed, accuracy, whatever the case may be, and point solution may be fine. But in certain areas, maybe the business is ready for a step function change. And so realizing, I think, that we want to go for that 10x, 100x factor is, I think, step one. And then there are other such kind of principles that you think about the purpose as opposed to the task or the settlement of tasks that humans are doing today and things like that. I think second thing, it's become a little bit boilerplate, but there is a lot of value in that, which is bringing diverse people together. And I think it really fosters creativity and imagination. So just today, in fact, I was speaking with Krishnan and Rahul before one of the sessions, and there was a problem I had that I have been thinking about for several weeks. But in our brainstorming, eventually I came up with the answer, but it was because of some things they had said. And I couldn't have arrived at that answer had I had not that discussion with them and the way Krishnan was framing the problem. So I think having business people, having people with AI mindset, having people who kind of think differently, bringing all of them together, or even escaping your own environment and visiting different places, I think that really does foster creativity. I think the third thing is use of generative AI. I am becoming more and more interested in that area. And I think what people have seen for physical design, and it has a lot of success in coming up with different designs that human had never imagined. I think we are going to start seeing in cognitive design now.
Excellent points. So, Avi, what is your view on how can we steer the direction? And in your book,
Okay.
You're surely arguing in favor of it. So how should we try to accomplish it?
So the industries that I think are most important and exciting to change are things like healthcare and education, where productivity growth has been extremely slow. And one of the reasons why productivity growth is so slow is because it's really hard to get all those different people sort of swimming in the same direction. And so we had a conference a couple weeks ago on AI in healthcare, and what AI can do in healthcare is extraordinary. There's diagnosis. There's lots and lots of evidence that machines are better than the median doctor in lots of contexts. Maybe not better than the best doctor, but better than the median doctor. Robotic surgeries are incredible. Scheduling. There's all sorts of amazing changes where the technology is already there. It just turns out the technology isn't the hard part. The hard part is the first hard part might be thinking through convincing doctors and hospital administrators that this is worth doing. But the harder part is changing the way we approve and accept new medical technologies and new medical processes. So I guess then, easy answer to the extent there is one is smart regulation, not less regulation. Be very clear, not less regulation, but smarter regulation to enable that kind of coordination. So in medicine, Hong Lau and Alberto Galasso have this paper showing, well, if you're going to regulate new medical technologies based on whether something goes wrong with the new process, you're not going to see a lot of new medical technologies. But if you're going to regulate medical procedures based on, hey, if something goes wrong, you're liable, irrespective of what technology you may have used, whether it was new or old, then that's going to encourage newer, safer technologies. And so there's this whole research field of economics of innovation that has, I think, a lot of insights into these kinds of ideas.
Great, yeah. So we've sort of gone from micro, we're now sort of approaching the macro level. So I know you're not a macroeconomist, David. I know that makes you comfortable if I even say the word. But just sort of at the government level, let's say, what can a government do to steer the direction of innovation?
Yeah, so first of all, economists have recognized for a long time that innovation is an economic activity. In fact, there's a famous book by Gerschenkrom, a Harvard economist. They had 2 chapters called Economics. Innovation is an economic activity. I know why you need 2 chapters for that. But but anyway, got the point across. And I guess so recognize that it responds to incentives means that we should think about what those incentives are. And do we have the right incentives? And where might the market not reflect what we collectively desire? And there are many, the market does many great things, but we recognize there's a reason we have a government, there's a reason we have public goods, we have a reason we have taxation, because the market is not going to address every public good. And I think there's enormous incentives to automate in the world, and that's what companies think about most. And I'm not saying that that's a misplaced thing to do, but that's certainly not all we want to occur. And a lot of the great technologies that are at the heart of what we do now, in fact, have been steered by public investment. And it doesn't mean the government decides this is the technology we'll have, but they invest in a variety of ways, whether that is the internet, whether that is electrification, whether that is a huge amount of our medical knowledge comes from the NIH, right? But it is the case that certainly in the United States, the government has stepped back enormously from its role in technological leadership and in R&D. And our R&D as a percentage of GDP has kind of flatlined, but that reflects a huge pullback by the government and a compensating increase from the private sector. But those are not perfect substitutes. What the government would fund and what the private sector would fund are just not going to be the same thing. And so I gave these examples earlier of the Great Firewall, but similarly of these different ways of improving healthcare or improving education. And a lot of the funding for those will come from the public sector, or ought to. So choosing that direction of leadership, I think, is extremely valuable. And not only because we get the technologies that we so much need, but they often are also an engine of job creation, expertise, and emerging skills, right? So if we actually make the investments in energy infrastructure that we need to make, it's going to create an enormous amount of not just more work, but new work and new expertise and it will lead to industries and innovation and technologies and products and fields of specialty. So I think we should recognize that economists have this notion that we just got here without the market, just based on the market, and now we're living on, and it was never that way, right? It was just that we were not born fully formed. We got here through a lot of hard work and a lot of public investment, and we should continue to take that leadership role to get where we want to go.
And just one small follow-up. So how can we, you and I have worked in a recent publication on trying to distinguish, what is a technology that augments labor, what's a technology that potentially automates labor. It's kind of a difficult thing to do. Can we really expect governments to sort of, ex ante, know whether, a proposed innovation is going to have beneficial impacts or not? Like, how should we think about structuring those incentives? Or is there another approach we should take there that's not sort of trying to target specifically on the outcome?
Yeah, so it's a super hard problem, right? So if we said we want green technology, we know what's a green technology, something that doesn't produce CO2, right? But if we want a labor augmenting technology, what does that look like, right? Many things that are thought to be labor saving turn out to be labor augmenting and vice versa. So it's much harder. So I guess I would rather target socially valuable applications of technology, which I think inevitably will create employment and emerging expertise along with them. But I wouldn't target the jobs as much as what do we want this technology to do for us, right? And that could be in education, that could be in power, that could be in much better healthcare delivery to many more people, right? So I think there's a lot of valuable places that we could invest.
All right. So we've talked a lot of, so far we've talked a lot about sort of upsides or potential upsides and how we could achieve them and maybe some, problems we could encounter on the way. But let's cross over to the dark side now and talk a little bit about things that could go horribly wrong. And we had a question, about, I want to explain two. One is the fairness and political sort of consequences or upheaval that could result from large structural change. Because there were also some online questions about this specifically. First, about sort of the fairness more narrowly in these algorithms themselves. Should we be first order concerned about biases, training data sets, perpetuating, say in labor market settings, hiring or promotions, but you could think of many other settings where these algorithms could have far-reaching effects. Is that something we should be first order worried about? And is that going to sort of impede our societal progress towards hopefully more equality in various dimensions? That's the first question. And I see, Sameena, you have maybe some thoughts about that, whether in your role as Indian mom or otherwise.
As a new mom, I'm not a new mom. Been a mom for many years. But yeah, it's much harder to do with kids, but then I think in AI we can do it more easily. But having said that, I think there is bias, and absolutely we have to be cognizant about fairness and not introducing more biases into the system. And like you said, one of the areas is definitely data, through which, and especially if we are looking at a narrow lens of how humans have done a certain thing and the output from humans, of course there are biases and subjectivity and variance that has been introduced in those data sets. I think the second thing is, which I think people talk about less, and we had a paper in Neurips about this, which was the implementation of algorithms, and the technical implementation of those algorithms can also introduce variance. So this is quite counterintuitive that even if you like fix the seed, but on like two different software implementations of the same algorithm, so it's the same model that you go and apply on two different technical systems, the variance could be as high as like 23%. But people, it's very counterintuitive. So I think that also, it is counterintuitive, yes.
This is like a version of Polanyi's revenge in a way, right? That there's not really, it's not really explainable.
Absolutely.
In the way that a human recruiter would explain, I've selected this person because of A, B, and C. Is that what you mean by this?
Yeah, it's not even explainable why in this software instance it should produce an output which is completely different on some other software system when you have fixed the model. Mm-hmm. It's the same model, same seed, different output. Right. So then how do you ensure that your model will be fair in real time when you have implemented it? So I think that's second, which you have to be cognizant about and measure, and but there are ways you can measure and control for it. And I think, but there is a third aspect which people talk about less, which is then what are the human-defined metrics that we are actually optimizing for? Mm-hmm. So, which is like, how do you define fairness? And that could be unfair itself in different scenarios. Right? So you could say that I'm going to use this fairness metric, but if you really think about it, you could, but actually like by using this fairness metric, I am biased towards this other thing or this other class. So I think that matching problem is also a significant problem. And in that, there is this notion of, for example, let's say, your output criteria for, which is kind of a related idea about like how do you choose the right metrics that you're optimizing for. Let's say you were optimizing for performance. But the notion of performance, let's say, is like how people performed in the past. But, or that could come up with some features which could say, I'm going to look at, creditworthiness, I'm going to look at this, I'm going to look at that. But then what about like a person's potential? So if you were then to change the notion of performance and you're going to say, I'm going to infer like person's future potential based on the college they're going to, based on all the other great things we heard today that are correlated with higher wages and things like that. And then I'm also going to include some diverse candidates and things like that, and that will be my performance measure. It will be a very different output. Mm-hmm. So I think there are these kind of three things we have to triage.
So you're saying, like, in principle, you could try to sort of counteract some of these biases in the data, but it's the actual implementation that sort of presents a lot of practical obstacles to improving. And I'm just wondering, Avi, in your, like, because in a way this is a choice of like, where do you deploy this prediction machine and what do you make it predict, right?
So I'm just yes. So
all right.
Thinking through the various pieces on political attitudes, there's we can tell stories in both directions on which technology is causing polarization and how that's working, which particular one. Manuel Trachtenberg at a conference 5 years ago. Manuel Trachtenberg is an economist who became a politician and then went back to being an economist. And his line was, if there's a revolution in the short run, it doesn't matter what the long run looks like. And so just thinking through, we can be quite optimistic about the long run. I am quite optimistic about the long run, but that, with that caveat in mind, I think is very important. Now, in terms of the fairness and discrimination, machines are going to be biased, but they're going to be biased because we humans are pretty awful. And so, are we pessimistic about machines or pessimistic about humans? There's a part of me that's more pessimistic, big part of me that's more pessimistic about humans. And I'm quite optimistic that with a machine, we can audit and figure out and improve where we know from human hiring processes the same person can see the same resume and make all sorts of different decisions. And so I think there's incredible opportunity here. And here's another version of where I worry about the regulatory side. Because they're auditable, you're liable for something going wrong. When humans aren't really auditable. And so it's very hard to sue someone for discrimination based on what goes on in their brain. And that might mean we end up with a more discriminatory outcome than we would have if we were using machines.
Right, yeah. So this is the earlier point also that like the counterfactual is not a perfect scenario. It's human judgment, which we know has all sorts of flaws, and it's very hard to train bias out of people. Harder probably than machines. Yeah, understood. Okay, so then this political polarization issue and sort of what you were already alluding to, sort of, the short run is going wrong, then, the long run no longer matters. To what extent, and this is also submitted online, several versions of this, is sort of, okay, let's just say that there's going to be a ton of automation coming from AI. And this is going to displace a lot of workers, at least in the short run. And it takes a while for people to adjust. And especially the concern that maybe this is becoming, because of the pace of these changes, right? It's one thing to say, there's going to be, a lot of changes in work, but it's going to take place over many generations, and people are going to just sort of, enter the labor market and do something else. But it's a different story if this is sort of extremely disruptive and fast. So let's just imagine that, that's a scenario. And first of all, I wonder how realistic you think that is. From your earlier talk, David, I got the feeling you think that's a bit more realistic now than you thought it was 10 years ago, maybe, but could be wrong. And then what do we know about the political consequences of such like disruptive economic shocks? And I'm going to first turn to you, David, because you have a ton of work in this area.
Sure. So first of all, I don't think we have to look to the future. We can look to the present. I mean, the last 40 years have been one of declining opportunity for people without higher levels of education, and people are pretty angry about it. And so I think some of it, not all of our political polarization, but some comes from the sense of, shortening horizons and limited opportunity in the sense that, sort of the things that people were doing that work well for their employment and for their families and so on just like are not any longer sufficient. And a kind of sense of frustration that, the last, X administrations of the, of the US presidency have, all claimed to be about restoring the, well-being of the middle class and really no one has made any progress on it. So I think and I do think that a lot of that has to do with technology, primarily, also globalization, also other social changes in tax codes, in labor organizing and so on. But there's enormous frustration there. I think that problem could get worse, and I think it will get worse if we don't work to prevent it from getting worse. Now, I don't, and some of the things we talked about how do you train, what type of jobs are you trying to create, where's the complementarity? I think there's a lot to be said there. But I think we also need to recognize that, a lot of the kind of polarization that we see, in the US, we see in Sweden that hasn't had the same problems as we had and throughout Western Europe, right? So I don't know that I fully understand, I don't want to fully attribute it to these economic forces. I think one thing, of course, another aspect of this is, the change in media has been so important and so consequential, and there is no longer kind of central truth anymore. Right? Who would have thought the information age would be the age where no one knew if anything was true anymore? But turns out that's the case. I think that's really important. But I think there's more to it, and I think it's easy to leap to single explanations. I think we rode a wave of 50 years of post-war, like don't want to go there again, and that sense, that has faded.
Any other panelists want to add to the political polarization question? If not, then I think we'll take we have few more minutes to take maybe a couple more questions if there are any. Please. And we have one there as well.
Hi. So I want to follow up on this idea of what workers should know and do in order to bargain for better job quality and support the institutions, which would allow them to have bargaining power.
All right. Worker bargaining power, important question. We had a question here in the middle. I don't know if we can get a microphone over so the online audience can hear.
Hi, my name is Bayan. I'm from Saudi Arabia. My question is it has more political view on it. So how can we prevent the technology to make more distractions in the world, considering like wars and political invasions of other countries? So how can we prevent the use of technology and such things?
All right.
Right behind you as well.
Yeah, let's do one more, and then I'm afraid we'll be out of time. But
Hi, I'm Ibrahim, MSPPM as well. If you were worried about the inequality that these tools can create in the US, what kind of further inequality can it create, even when we think about worldwide, knowing that already there is huge disparities in education levels between the developed world and the developing world. So what can that even mean moving forward?
Sorry, I didn't totally get the question. So what is what?
The disparities like on a world stage, basically, not just in the
Not
US.
just yes, that's right. Okay, excellent question. So yeah, maybe let's start there. That was also one that was submitted online. So all of this, what does it mean from a sort of developing country setting? And perhaps Majd, from an education perspective, you probably have something to say about this.
There's something I've been wanting to say that also affects some of the earlier discussions we've been having. Something that we do wrong in technology training, especially in emerging technology training, is we focus too much on the technology. And we don't train the human being to become an advocate of the technology so that they recognize all aspects of it. And not only what it can do, and it can do well, and the problems that it can solve, but also the brittleness of the technology, the data that can make it biased, and the data that could make it do the wrong thing. And so we have to become more intentional about creating advocates of the technology that recognize the entire spectrum. And I think we're doing a lousy job at that because we're very focused, because we're being competitive, and our graduates are being evaluated on their technological capabilities and aptitude, that we're missing an opportunity to recognize the entire spectrum so that we can graduate people who are more likely to recognize what technology can and cannot do and how it can be misused, and recognize where it should be deployed so that we don't necessarily easily make it available so that we can do the wrong things with it, disinformation, and so on and so forth. So that's something that we have to do a much better job as we're training this large number of individuals to fill these large number of jobs, and this narrow training into this is what AI can do, and now go and make more AI and solve problems that will just be the predictive type of jobs that will replace and automate. I think we need to think of it differently, and how do we train individuals so that they become more active members of how what this technology can do, and how do we leverage it for these better outcomes that David is speaking about.
Right. Well, maybe also to ask you, David, so I know also from an education perspective, many US institutions are trying to target also students in developing countries with like online education, which potentially AI could also play a big role in. So maybe there's also some positives there that you could see from a developing country perspective.
Sure. So first, I mean, it's an irony of our era that inequality is rising in most countries, but it's falling globally, right? So in fact, the world is more equal because there's been such a giant reduction in poverty. So there's some hope there in some sense, and I think a lot of the faster growth is happening in the less affluent parts of the world, and so maybe there will be some more convergence than there's been. But yeah, I mean, this is another one of the enormous potential benefits of the technology more broadly, is to make education, not only make education more accessible, but also kind of opportunity to use that education, right? So we have we have very narrow pipelines for identifying talent, right? For figuring out who is qualified to do X, Y, or Z. And those pipelines massively underrepresent the set of talent that's out there in the world. And right, it's not enough to be smart. You also have to be born in the right place and go to the right school, to be discovered and end up, here. And in fact, there's an abundance of talent worldwide. And so, I'll mention one initiative out at MIT, which my colleagues Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee and Benjamin Olkman put together, which was they created what they call Data Economics and Development Policy Program, and essentially we took they created online courses, and they're pretty challenging courses. You can take them for free if you want to. You can take them and register for them and take the tests, and you take the tests in a kind of a supervised setting, and if you do well, you get what's called a MicroMasters from MITx, which is not MIT, it's MITx. However, yeah, I know. And then, but then the top students from that can apply and come and spend a residential semester at MIT and get an MIT master's degree in this field, and often are sponsored by MIT, by foundations, by their host governments. But it brings extraordinary people from around the world who would never never have, found their way into this tributary, not because they lacked the talent, but because there was no window into that, right? So I do think it does. I think even as it creates inequality, I'm sure more inequality will result in many ways. It also creates opportunity for people who are talented and hardworking and good-spirited, who would never have been able to access the tools and the technologies and the audiences. So I think there's hope there.
Avi, so you have something.
I just wanted to. So you're talking about talent, but when I think of maybe your career and the advocacy that you've succeeded on, it's actually not about the talented. So yes, the talent is about equality of opportunity, but there's a whole bunch of challenges that we faced over the past 70 years that you've documented on what about the people who we might not think of as talented. They still deserve good middle-class jobs and a good life, and truck drivers, and there were a handful of other jobs that really enabled that. And technological change, really preceding AI, has made that very, very hard. And so one of the challenges to those of you who are reinventing the future is to think through what do the next set of jobs look like that enable you to use technology not just to find the talented, but to enable the people who might not be in the super right tail of some specialized skill, still be able to live productive and happy working lives.
And maybe this ties in perfectly to the question about worker bargaining power and worker voice, which seems very central to all of this, right? We want workers to have a say in, what their workplace looks like, what kind of technology they're interacting with, how they're shaping, the actual users of those technologies. How can we do better there with worker voice, with worker bargaining power? Let's, hear one potential initiative from all of you and call it a day and move on to drinks. That's the next item. Because I think it's a great sort of wrap up of all these questions. And I apologize if I haven't got to every single question, but hopefully it's a good wrap up. So shall we just start with you, Majd?
Sure. I think when we are training individuals right now, we're kind of asking them to trust us. We say, come, get a degree, and then go find a job. And that gap in between, we don't do much about. And I think we ought to. We ought to recognize that there's an interview process, there's a positioning process, there's a bargaining process, there's a negotiation process. And we don't do a very good job at training individuals to be able to position themselves as members of the workforce and what do they bring to the table. We just do the technical training, credentialing, and then we push them out there and say, best wishes and send us money when you make a lot of money. And so I think we need to do much more there. And that's something we have to think about. And make as part of the curriculum rather than something that we do as
on the side.
On the side, exactly.
Understood. Clear. What do you think, Sameena?
So I think a couple of things. One, I think when we talk about high-paying jobs and fancy jobs, whatever, I think we often overemphasize the technical or the specialty nature of that as opposed to the social or the human aspects of that. And I think the really top earners, they're very good at certain social skills that the rest are not. And I think those types of skills we should emphasize more. Like you said, negotiation, self-advocacy, and then often in developing countries, you never even hear the word advocacy, self-advocacy. It's it's something looked down upon. So so I think those kinds of things I think we should speak more of. Also, I think to the point Avi, you were saying, for me, apart from the Indian mom jokes, but actually in reality, my son is nonverbal autistic, so it would be a great day if he comes and says something I want to be a truck driver. I would be actually jumping. But and I think in technology, it could, and the way even people with disabilities and things like that, the way it can augment their lives and get them to a place that they can function. And I think having my son's experience has also taught me a lot about what is fulfillment and happiness, as opposed to what's next. So I think we need to think about that too.
Great.
Okay.
Avi.
So I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, Amazon There was this headline, Amazon automatically firing workers from its warehouses. Remember that one? So there was a whole bunch that was not quite true in that story, but even if we take it as true, okay? So even if we say they built a prediction tool so that every worker got a score every week, and then at the end of the week, if you were below that score, this is sort of how the news reported it. It's not really what was happening. If you were below that score, you get an email saying you're fired. Okay. And so first is that's not happening yet because a human has to decide to implement that. But even if a human did decide to implement it, it's still not a machine doing the firing. Okay? It is still a human, presumably at Amazon's headquarters, who says, you know what, I don't trust the managers at my warehouses anymore to figure out how to manage their workers. And instead, it's a centralization of power. It's not an It's not that the machine is making a decision. And a lot of the time when we talk about bargaining power in these aspects, especially in hiring and firing, when we think about it as machines making decisions, one, we feel helpless, and two, well, the machines must be doing it right. So there must be a reason for it. But once we recognize, no, what's happening here is instead of warehouse managers making the decision, someone at headquarters has decided to centralize it. Well, that's something we can get our heads around, think through what the implications are for worker bargaining power and for just management overall.
Okay, management practices, important. David, I'll leave you the final worker power.
The sloppy seconds. Well, let me kind of make a meta point of what Avi just made. In the MIT Task Force and the Work of the Future, we did a lot of sort of cross-country comparisons. And, two things are very striking when you look at the evolution of labor markets in industrialized countries over the last 4 decades. One, you've seen rising inequality in all of them. But two, the degree is enormously variable, right? And, the U.S. has, become so much more unequal than it has, Germany or Spain or France, or, to give you an example, like one thing if you look at what is a person doing basically a McDonald's job earn in various countries. So if you say the US worker is earning $10.33 an hour, well, you can say, well, okay, let's compare it to Sweden, it's $24 an hour, and you say, okay, Sweden, like that's Scandinavia, it's another planet, let's not make that comparison. But now just look at Canada, right? And the guy at Tim Hortons is making, $13 an hour, right? He's not 30% more productive. Right? So these are institutional choices. It's not, the market has some sway. Clearly inequality is rising in all these places. It's not a coincidence. But it's crazy to think that we're so constrained that we can't, that it just has to be this way and we have no degrees of freedom. And if we fight the market, unemployment results and that's clearly not the case. So there's a lot of social choice and we give up our agency when we think that it has to be the way it is, because if we deviated, it would be worse.
Great. I think it's a good note to end on. I want to thank our panelists for their time, their expertise. And of course, you, our wonderful audience, both live and online, and the Block Center for organizing, hosting this conversation, and for graciously providing drinks and snacks in the rotunda on the first floor.
And thanks to
Hope to see you there.
Yeah.